We have Dr. Jess Hardley, Edith Cowan University, Western Australia. Is it Perth or is it just outside?
It is in Perth. So I am now based at the new city campus. It
Ooh.
opened in January this year.
Oh, wow, it's a
Yeah,
brand
so
new.
right in the middle of the city centre.
Ah,
And I really feel that you can start to feel a shift in the city vibe. It's really great.
that's really cool, to be fair,
Mm,
and very different to being in a city university to a campus university. Is huge
yes.
difference, right?
Mm,
And you're postdoc research fellow on the Digital Child Project, and at Edith
yes.
Cowan, you are what's the position at Edith Cowan? I forget.
So I'm a research fellow in the School
Mm,
of Arts and Humanities. My position, it does sit within the ARC, so the Australian Research Council Centre of Excellence for the Digital Child. So my position is research only, and I am based at Edith Cowan, which is one of the six universities around Australia that are part of Digital Child.
yeah, because it's spread all the way across the vast continent of Australia, right?
Yes. So there's two universities in Perth. So there's Edith Cowan and Curtin University,
Hmm.
and then the other four are on the east coast of
Fair.
Australia. Mm.
Um, I mean, it would be churlish of me not to ask you about social media to begin with, because Australia is, of course, the global guinea pig for banning social media for under 16s. And this debate is live in the UK at the moment, right? So there is a significant amount of pressure being put on our current government to enact a a ban, in effect, and I think modelled on the Australian model. The government is squirming around this, and parliamentary votes have gone in favour of a ban, and they still won't enact it because of lobbyists, effectively. But it's been, is it a year now that the ban's been in place, or slightly
So
longer than a year?
less. It came into
Okay,
effect in December last year.
okay,
So
got it.
December 2025. The legislation was passed at least a year ago, I believe. I
That's what
can't
I was
recall.
thinking. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
but then it came into effect in December. So
so
we're 6 months in.
what are our thoughts on it so far?
So initially, there was a lot of concern, particularly from young people around um, losing their accounts. There were questions around, well, will the accounts be suspended? And then when they turn 16, will they get their
Mm,
old accounts back with their content, with their networks? So there were a lot of questions that couldn't be answered because I don't think it had been thought through to that level. But then immediately what we found is that there was just so many workarounds. The age verification process really did not function the way that the Australian federal government had, I guess, hoped that it would. So there are still many teenagers um, who who under the new policy their account should have been blocked or deleted, and it hasn't been. But in, I think it was January or February this year, there was a newspaper article in Australia that published that there were 4.5 million accounts deleted sort of overnight
okay.
within Australia. So that's really significant.
Mm.
So there's quite conflicting information around what is being provided through like the official reporting of numbers, but then also what we're hearing from teenagers where nothing has changed. So it seems to be a bit hit and miss in terms of who it is impacting.
It's yeah, and it's kind of the picture I thought would emerge from this, but there's really interesting nuance, of course, in that, and I guess. the reflections of teenagers, I feel, are far more authentic in this space than the official thing. Because obviously, officially, you want to make this look like a success, and I think the government can acknowledge issues with it while still giving headline figures that this is so important. In terms of teenagers, what I, I, are teenagers reporting any modification of use or any changes in habits post
Um,
this draconian measure?
yeah, so what I've found quite interesting is going through Reddit threads
Mm,
around hacks or workarounds.
wow.
So
Okay.
where, and who would have thought that in 2026 Reddit would make such a comeback? I mean, you just
It's
can't predict
the
these
thing that won't
platforms.
die. It's the
No,
platform that won't die. Yeah.
it's yeah. So there are, I mean, there's different ways of using VPNs. Of you can have an account signed up using a parent, a guardian, an older friend.
Hmm.
There's so many different ways for teenagers to access um, these particular social media sites. But what we're also we there is an awareness around is that some teenagers are migrating to other platforms which are less regulated. And
Such
so
as.
that I knew you were going to ask that question, and it's the end of the day, and I'm thinking, oh no. So I believe Discord. I'm
In
not sure if Discord was
Interesting.
part of um, the platforms that were banned.
I think
So there's
the platform architecture of Discord would make it much easier to work around things as well, which,
yeah.
yeah.
So there's federal organisations like eSafety. They're starting to produce some documents to educate parents around apps and platforms that they perhaps have never heard of, and
Mm,
their teenagers are now migrating to those apps, and they don't know how they work. They don't know what the apps look like, and so in this way of protecting teens, well, in some ways, what we're seeing is perhaps that's having the opposite effect.
it's it's really, really interesting. And I mean, at a personal level for you, I understand the drive of the Australian government here to limit social media use because social media use in this context, right, is identified as an issue in terms of schooling, in terms of overall mental health, in terms of the influences on body image, etc. Issues which we're really familiar with for the past decade and a half, I would say, possibly longer even. Um, what's the motivating factor for teens to stay, do you think? That because teenage
To
users
stay
are
on these
Yeah,
platforms.
because teenage users are not unaware of those issues. They may not be formalized in education and so on. And I think one of the
Mm,
gaps really that needs to be addressed is education earlier in their education journey towards, about social media effectively, and not just about the
mm.
dangers, but about the benefits as well, which I don't think are articulated well. But for the teens themselves, what's driving them to stay?
Um, so there's a few different threads there. I think from the first one it really comes from my particular interest in this topic, which is around safety outside of the home. So
Mm,
the extension from my PhD
yeah.
research, it's around how do people connect through their smartphones, through apps, um, through networked connectivity in a way that makes people feel safer, or maybe perhaps they actually are safer when they're away from home. And so, what we're seeing is that at this critical time in teens' lives where they are becoming increasingly independent, they're starting to spend more time out of the home alone or with their peers. And many of them are losing the infrastructure which once did connect them.
Mm.
So for me and my particular research angle on this is around safety, is around being able to stay connected with peers, with family, um, and we don't know what teens are doing to replace those sorts of apps. So if you think about Snapchat with Snap Maps, I
Yeah.
know from my own research that older teens and young adults, they were using that a lot as a networked safety structure. We can imagine that teens were using it in a very similar way, and they have potentially stopped doing that now, but we don't know what they're replacing it with. So that's what
Mm.
I'm hoping to pilot in the coming months, and then to build that into a larger project from next year onwards.
I think it's a really interesting um, trajectory because it speaks to we're incredibly familiar with the fallacy almost of the digital native. That discursive function of the digital native, uh, it so oversimplifies young people's relationship to technology. But there is, I think, in what we're seeing in Australia, and I think what we'll, to a lesser extent in the UK, where there's been a ban enacted or age restrictions enacted on particular material online, where we're seeing people do these workarounds, and indeed the discussion of workarounds takes place on forums like Reddit and etc. And it's really proved ineffective in terms of the government's aims for that explicit material. It almost there's almost a positive aspect here in terms of the literacy that teens are showing with regards to technology. And for so long in an app infrastructure, that literacy has been taken away from people. You just download the app, you don't read the terms and conditions, install, get your free lunch, get exploited for data. This has been the paradigm of things for a very long time. And
Mm.
there's almost like an ownership of task and purpose, which is emerging, which would have always been there in the practices of use, but is now being surfaced much more clearly. And it gives us,
Yes.
it doesn't just give us as researchers, I think, an opportunity to understand how teens use things. It also gives teenage users an ability to reflect on use and
Well, and
to
the
avoid,
creativity of
yeah,
use, and the creativity and the repurposing. So I think, Leighton, we might have talked about this when we caught up last year, that so the social media ban is occurring in tandem with smartphone bans in
yeah,
schools. And of course, they're very connected, but they are separate policies and separate practices. So, with the smartphone ban in many schools across Australia, but it being compulsory to have a laptop, means that some kids are starting to use Excel live documents as a way to chat with their peers,
wow.
because it's a live document. They can chat to one another. If a teacher sort of glances over the student's shoulder, it might look as though they're doing their work. And so again, who would have thought that
Just
Excel would have such a function in
I
2026?
mean, you're not as old as me, but this reminds me of like passing notes in class when
Yes,
I was a
yes,
kid,
yeah,
it's sort of, yeah, I am writing this
mm,
boring stuff on Shakespeare. Honestly,
yeah,
you
truly.
know, it,
So
it's
I
fascinating. It's
really
fascinating how
think
the
that,
paradigm's been there before. It's just this is
oh,
way more innovative.
absolutely. Yeah, and I think that like the time is now to talk to youth, to talk to teens, to find out,
Yeah.
what their creative practices are, and but also with the understanding of um, they might want a lot of privacy around these
Mm.
practices that they're using, because maybe they don't want researchers to be publishing articles on it and then notifying the world and their parents
And
of,
closing that down.
yeah. So it's also about, okay, how do we respect their autonomy? But part of where Digital Child comes in, because Digital Child is very much focused on birth to 8 years old,
Hmm.
there is a really large focus on media literacy, games
Mm.
literacy, there's all the different forms of literacy. And up until recently, part of Digital Child, I was based in the School of Education. And the main project I was working on there was around understanding how young children, so from 3 to 5 years old, how do they learn about digital technologies in the home environment, and how are those learnings and understandings translated or not into early learning centres and settings. And then part of that it was also, well, how do the educators support young children's digital funds of knowledge?
Mm. And
So really bringing that the literacy younger and younger. It doesn't mean that they need to be on devices all the time,
no.
but it could be, incorporating play with wooden blocks that look like smartphones, or there's lots of different ways um, to introduce these conversations at a younger age.
And it's a really fascinating, I mean, a huge area and so many fascinating contours to it. And the one that strikes me from my research as being primary interest, I guess, is around sort of game literacy. And, obviously we know how important play is to early development. Um, I think there's been less focus, particularly in game studies as an academic area, but I think in general, wider than education studies, which is very versed in this, around the effect of digital games on young development and the sort of the different paradigms of digital games where you have games which are very collaborative, very focused on bringing children together into a virtual space in order to play with one another, which obviously then becomes impacted by the kind of legislation that's been enacted in Australia to an extent. And but also we have the paradigm of games where there is, I don't want to say solipsistic, but there's a more isolated game experience. And are we seeing, and I'm really, my reflections here are driven, I think, by the kind of dyadic relationship that we have with AI. And is there something brewing, or are there problematic signs amongst very young children that they're developing relationships with technology which are dyadic in nature, and that has an effect on their ability to socialize, play, be a part of that community, which is so important in early education?
Um, so one of the big findings within much of the research which spans across Digital Child, which includes up to 200 researchers. So there's a lot
Mm,
of different angles on this and perspectives. But one of the things that the centre really has focused on is that it's not necessarily how much time young children are spending with digital technologies, but it's the content
mm.
and the context of it. So, but I mean, the example, I'm not sure if this speaks exactly to what you're asking, but the example that comes to mind was a series of workshops that we ran in March last year at the State Library of Western Australia. And there were a range of activities. In total, I think there were about 20 children from 3 to 7 with a parent or guardian. And one of the activities was asking them to draw their perfect day. And
Okay.
on their, yeah, I could see a few of you, and maybe that was my accent. Perfect day. So there was a piece of paper provided, and there were 5 boxes. And the idea was for each child to draw 5 images of their perfect day. And even though the workshops themselves were very much, all the recruitment was around digital technologies. The children, they each got a Lego box as a thank you at the end. There was all of this scaffolding around it being about technologies. But what they were drawing, so many of them did not include any digital technologies at all. And it was fascinating. What I think featured the most was ice cream.
Of course.
Yes. Um, Swimming in the pool. Um, some of them were, going to school because they have a favorite teacher. Pets. There really wasn't this overwhelming sense of children depicting digital technologies when they're imagining their
Mm.
perfect day. And that was quite a surprise to us.
It feels like a little surprise, right? But it's really heartening.
It was.
It's like that's brilliant because
Mm,
um for children of that age to sort of prioritize not just but the nature of the things that they do see as like the
yeah.
perfect day is so it's really sweet, but it's also it's really affirming,
Yes.
to look at that and think, oh, you sweethearts,
Yeah.
and
And
that's what
then,
childhood I guess should be, and yeah.
yes. And then there were some children who, they may have drawn a picture of their cat. Maybe they went to the library with their mum. And if they did have an image of a digital technology, some of them were so specific. So they would get all the colors and they would start drawing cables because
Wow.
so it was a representation of the infrastructure of
Mm,
of digital technologies. It was absolutely fascinating.
that's amazing. Is that going to are some of
Um,
those things going to be on display? Are they going to be so are
so I
they
have a paper under review at the moment where some of
brilliant?
those images will be included, and that's a good idea actually. Maybe there should be some kind of repository created. I'll talk to
Hmm.
the media team at Digital Child.
I think it
Thanks,
would be
thanks
really
for that
cool
idea.
to
Yeah,
sort of not just to see what it's always cool to see things like that, but to gain a sense of how children see that idea of the
yes,
ideal in
yeah.
the environment which is so infused with digital tech. I think that'd
Mm.
be really interesting.
I'm also happy to share some PowerPoint slides from a conference paper that I delivered last year on this topic, where it includes some of the images. So I'll
Wow,
flick that through in
that'd be
the
really
email as
useful.
well. One other finding, so we haven't written about this, that there just wasn't enough data, I think, to really write about it. But it was an observation from a professor that I was working with. She has spent decades in early childhood, and
Hmm.
knows, child development in a way that I probably never will because I come from media and comms. And what she was saying throughout these workshops was the way that the children were holding the texters and the pens and the pencils, and that what she was observing was that children who, historically speaking, may have had a bit more control over writing or drawing, still had a power grip. So the way that they were holding the drawing implement, there was potentially some developmental delay occurring there because maybe they were using digital technologies more than doing handwriting or drawing. Um,
Sort of the mechanical aspect of
of the
doing,
hand.
yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's, I mean, it kind of it reminds me of David Sudnow and his stuff on the hand, and Sean Moores
Mm,
and guys like that, who
yes.
um, that idea of knowledge in the hands is really, really important. And
Mm,
one of my previous PhD students who now works as a lecturer here, Sarah Williams, she did a lot of research on digital literacy in schools and the programs that have been looking at policy as well as practice. But one of her observations was in a primary school that early lessons with computers, as I'm sitting in front of now, mouse, keyboard, etc., were kind of almost chaotic in some ways because, of course, the children didn't know what this keyboard did. They didn't know what the mouse. So that you'd have them sort of trying to move the cursor by hanging the mouse by the cable and things like this, because in the home environment, it's a touchscreen environment, and to be presented with these more, mechanistic methods of human computer interface was really bewildering. But of course, I
Mm,
think the assumption of the education system and the curricula is they've all got computers at home. So, and it'll be this type of computer, and it's slow. And then we have a lot of evidence in the UK about it's framed as uh, literacy rates amongst young children are decreasing, but the way that literacy rate is traditional literacy rate is tested is often by writing, and it doesn't take into
mm.
account that my handwriting is a disgrace, quite frankly. And when I was 15, 16, my handwriting was beautiful. And now I look at it and I think, what, what did I
Yeah.
write? It's because
Who scribbled this?
I sit at a
Mm,
screen all day typing, and those mechanistic skills across the board
mm.
are, I don't want to say are made worse, they are affected by. And this is really important in terms
They're
of,
shifting.
I think we need an understanding framework more of the children's skills. They're not worse than before. The skills are different, you know.
Yes. And when we think about keyboards, they're often designed for an adult.
Sure.
You really need to seek out a child-sized keyboard so that it fits to the dimensions of a child's hand. So the child being bewildered by what's in front of them, it's not only because they may not have had that repetition of use, it's also because it doesn't fit the
Yeah.
size of their hands at that age. Um, Across so many studies within digital child, we are just finding over and over again that the iPad remains the device of choice at home when it
Doesn't
comes to
surprise
young
me.
children.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Mm.
it's the ease of access of that device for young children is so important, right? And I remember
Mm.
my cousin's children, they'll be 11 and 9 now, but the iPad was their thing. It just there was an allure to it, but they were also able to do a lot of learning things with that
Mm.
device, which was really great to see when they were younger. And yeah, they had some issues with writing and things like that, but you know,
I
they
mean, we
overcame those.
also, yeah, we know for adults as well that spending as much time staring at our smartphones as many of us are doing, it's not good for us either.
No,
Each year I go to the optometrist and I know that there is that long-term impact of spending so much time in front of screens. So, and similar with social media, this conversation around, well, social media is bad for children. Well, it's not exactly good for adults.
no,
So,
no, and
but
I
but
think it's an
trying not to
important, yeah.
fall into that it's good or bad because the reality is it does exist. So, well, what do we do with it?
It's a fascinating part of the debate. Definitely that, social media is so bad for children. So let's just broaden that a little bit,
Yeah.
as the political world burns to a cinder around us, is maybe we should reflect on social media use in a much wider way.
Mm.
Jess, thank you so much for your insights on this, and
Thanks for having me.
can't wait to see you in October when
Yes.
we'll get far more people to experience your insights.
Yes. And yeah, we'll connect before then. Great.
Fab.
Thanks
Thank you,
so
Jess.
much.